If you are an Arma mission maker and have ever tried experimenting with the Spawn AI module, you will have seen that the module gives you very few options for factions that you can use. In this tutorial I will show you how you can go around this limitation. Let's type this into the module's initialization field. This, space, setVariable, space, opening square bracket, quote, faction, quote, comma, space, 2 quotation marks, closing square bracket, semicolon. We need to input a class name for a faction we want to use in between those 2 quotation marks. This is how we find that class name. Go to Tools, Config Viewer. Here we have to find an entry named CFG Groups. Double-click to open. Open aside. Here you can see class names for various factions. For reference, when you click a class name, here you see the faction's name as it would show up in the editor. You can select and copy the faction class name, here. Let's open the spawner module again and paste the class name we have copied in between the quotation marks. It is important to set the side on the module to the one that matches the faction you have selected. Depending on the faction you want to use, this may be all you have to do. Some factions, however, require a bit more effort to get working. Let's find out why that is and what can we do about it. When you start a mission, the code inside the AI spawner module loads all the groups, meaning these, and categorizes them by type: infantry, motorized, mechanized and armored. Let's dig a little deeper into the configuration to see where the groups reside. Note that the groups are placed inside categories. This faction would work without a problem as all the categories are named in a way that the spawner module code can recognize. Other factions may use names that the spawner module's code does not recognize. This means that the module can't determine whether this category contains infantry groups, or mechanized, or armored, or what. When that happens, it ignores that group and doesn't load it. In the example shown here, the spawner wouldn't load any of the infantry groups for this faction. What we need to do is modify this code to make it recognize these type names and run it on the Spawn AI module. It's actually not as difficult as it may seem. In the description of this video, you will find a few links. Look for one titled, Spawner Group Adapter Template. Copy the code from that link and paste it into your code or text editor of choice. Let's say we want to spawn Russian soldiers in desert gear alongside the Pakistani army to fight against the US Marine Corps Desert and Desert Frog variants. That's 4 different categories of infantry groups. So in the code you've just copied, prepare 4 lines above the infantry part like seen here. Note the syntax here. Only the last line before the code in curly braces ends with a column. Other lines that map to the same group type end with a semicolon. Now find each of the group category class name in the config viewer and paste it into these rows. The Pakistani army actually uses the regular infantry category name, so it turns out we can delete that row. Select and copy this code. Back in the game, create a game logic entity. Paste the code into its initialization field. Now we need to somehow run this code on the Spawn AI modules we place in the editor. Create a trigger. Leave the type, activation and repeatable fields unselected. Check the box for server only. Look for another link in the video description, titled, Adapter Runner Trigger. Copy the conditions and on activation code into the relevant fields. Now let's set up the spawner modules for the Russian and Pakistani factions to test this out. And it works. But we obviously have a problem. Sometimes we see soldiers spawning in woodland camo even though that wasn't our plan. That is because both the Russian and US Marine factions also have the standard category named infantry which gets loaded by the spawner module. We can't remove it from our adapter either, because it is the category for the Pakistani army as well. To fix this, we have to specify which groups we want not to be spawned in the blacklisted groups field of the relevant spawner module. The group names must be surrounded by quotes and separated by commas. This part may be tedious, but it works. There's one last thing we need to talk about. On rare occasions, something doesn't load right and the spawn AI modules fail to initialize at all. We can fix this by adding a trigger which will detect when this happens and restart the modules which failed to initialize. Like previously, create a trigger and check the box for server only. Find a link titled Spawner Init Fixer Trigger in the video description and copy the condition and on activation code into the appropriate fields. This concludes the tutorial. Thank you for watching and good luck with your creations.